This story is inspired by true events, so I won't be using any specific names or places. It was a cold winter night, about 12 years ago when it happened, driving home late one night after a get-together with some old buddies of mine. I was a little worried about the icy roads since it had been snowing all day, so I was mindful of my speed and general handling of my custom 1971 Chevy. The radio was busted and I was dying for a smoke, and I couldn't ignore the eerie sense of isolation I was feeling on this particular stretch of road. Come to think of it, I hadn't seen another car for miles, which is why I was surprised to see something in the middle of the road just up ahead. By the time I realized what I was looking at, I feared it was already too late, as I slammed on the brakes and braced for impact. This was all followed by a sudden blanket of silence. Even with the engine still running, I couldn't hear anything. But I could feel the cold from outside. My eyes were still closed at this point, trying frantically to summon up the courage to open them. But when I did, I was shocked at what I saw. She had not moved or reacted in any way since I first spotted her in the middle of the road, and she didn't appear to acknowledge my presence whatsoever. My first impression was how improperly dressed she was for the weather, and that she must have been freezing. I looked around to see if there was a bar or restaurant nearby where she might have come from, but I knew the area pretty well, and there was nothing around here except for a payphone and a gas station a few miles down the road. I had seen some pretty weird things on Friday nights before, back in the day, but this really topped them all, and this whole thing started to give me the creeps. I didn't want to startle her by beeping the horn, but before I got around to figuring out what to do next, she began slowly walking forward. That's when I realized she was without any shoes and began walking barefoot on the snow at the side of the road, which I thought was crazy. I began cruising alongside her to try to get her attention, but my efforts were just ignored. She seemed pretty out of it, and I began to assume that drugs were involved. But I couldn't just leave her alone out in the cold. It was only when I beeped the horn for a third time that she finally stopped, and just stood there quietly in the snow. I hesitated for a while, but decided to get out of the car and tried to help. But just as I opened the door and stepped out, she simply vanished, out of sight. The only sign of life was the eerie cawing of crows from above, which just made everything feel even more creepy. I walked over to where I had last seen her, and there was no one there. This next part was what really got me spooked. When I looked down to my right, I was completely shocked when I realized that there were no footprints in the snow. After about a minute of just standing at the side of the road like an idiot, I got back into my car and tried to make sense of it all. I had to get out of there, so I quickly drove away and continued down the road. Even after a mile or so, I just couldn't get it out of my head. I tried to approach it at every angle, but it just left me with more questions than answers. Anyway, I was eager to get home and sleep it off. But just when I thought the worst of the evening was behind me, I saw something on the side of the road. Instinctively, I already reduced my speed to avoid any more close calls, and was horrified to discover that it was a car that had swerved off the road and was now partially submerged under the snow. Deep down, I was hoping that the accident happened a while back and that the emergency services had already been there. But I was terrified to realize that I was the first on the scene when I spotted a body slumped over in the driver's seat. I wasn't prepared to see a dead body that night, or on any other night. And I certainly wasn't prepared to see such a familiar stranger.